Yes, this is the most expensive keyboard I have ever built, and yes, probably the most beautiful keyboard I've ever built, coming in at just under $500. I know, $500, let it sink in. But anyway, this is a Tofu65, and every part of this is of the utmost quality, so let's get started. Out of the box, which was shipped from the KBD Fans website, we have some solid packaging, with this nicely wrapped PCB on the top of the kit. Look at that for a second. Yeah, stunning! Moving on to what's underneath. We have the CNC aluminum case nicely wrapped so as not to get it scratched. Now, usually I skip through the unboxing bit, but let's just take a look at that gorgeous red color of the brushed aluminum. The way the light hits it from some of the angles, you get a darker, more burgundy undertone, and from other angles you get a more vibrant color. Very nicely done. When I flip it, you can see this brass weight, which is an upgrade, and it adds that extra heft, which creates a more premium feeling board. Now to finish it up, we get some rubber feet for the case, and of course the stabilizers. To the average person, what's left in the box may seem like trash, but it's actually pretty good if you have another keyboard for creating case foam. Now that we've taken a look at everything, we can start building! No matter what, step one is to stick on the rubber feet. We've spent a lot of money here, and the last thing we want is to damage the case. It is solid aluminum, but it can still get scratched and scuffed, and I would say it's best to err on the side of caution when it comes to these things. With that done, we gotta test the PCB. If the PCB is broken, the keyboard is useless, and that's because the PCB is the brain of the board, which connects the keystrokes that you make to the computer itself. So how do we test it? Well, we gotta touch metal to the little actuators you can see me doing here, and we do that after plugging it into our computer and opening up a keyboard tester. If the right message is sent to the tester after you touch the metal to the sockets, then you're good to go. You gotta do this for every socket before you can move on. Now, moving on, we get to deal with the stabilizers, my least favorite part, because it's so tedious. They come with these O-rings that help stabilize them even more once we screw them in, because stock, they are just too jingly. So, what we have to do is take them apart carefully, like I am doing here, and then we have to apply some lube. The lube of my choice would be this nice buttery Krytox 205 grade 0. It's not too light and it's not too thick. I evenly applied lube to each part of the stabilizer, starting with the housing, making sure to use the same amount for each side. Like I said before, this is a tedious process, but it will definitely be worth it in the end, as it prevents you from being annoyed by the otherwise jangly nature of these stabilizers if you're using this keyboard every day. After lubing everything up, to stabilize the stabilizers further, I clip their little insect legs, as I like to call them. I use this nail cutter for this step as it gives it a clean cut, and the nail cutters are the perfect size for this modification. You can't really find scissors that'll do exactly what you need to do. And there you go. You want them to look nice and clean like this. With that done, we can lube up the sides and do that nice and evenly before we get to the bars. And finally onto the bar, before snapping everything back into place. I then did a quick band-aid mod for each stabilizer and screwed them into the PCB. And now a transition to the switches for this board, which are the Durock Koala switches, 62 grams. They're a nice tactile switch. To spruce them up, I added these polycarbonate films to the polymer nylon and polycarbonate housing. I then added a dash of some Krytox 205 grade 0 to each side of the gold-plated springs. The gold helps with longevity, and I'm sure there are other auditory benefits to it as well. From there, I evenly applied lube to the switch stems, being careful to avoid the little bump on the edge. The bump is what creates the tactile feel for the switch, and I wanted it to be more pronounced for this board, so that's why I avoided lubing it. If you put lube to it, it makes it more of a rounded, buttery bump as opposed to a sharp, tactile bump as you type. I then reassemble the switch, place the stem atop the spring before snapping on the housing. I did this for each switch. With that complete, we can move on to the most permanent part of the assembly here, being the soldering. It can be a little intimidating at first, but all you gotta do is briefly touch the tip of the soldering gun to the metal top of the switch that's pointing through the hole, and then feed your string of lead to the area where the heat is being applied. Be sure to use this flicking up motion. You don't want to melt too much lead, rather build a little conal dome that completely covers the opening, but leaves the tip of the switch slightly exposed. As you're going through the process, you don't necessarily want to snap in all the switches at once. I started with the edge pieces just to ensure that my plate was level with the PCB before I started soldering things in, and as I went on, I started snapping in more and more just to make sure that everything was as straight as possible. That'll give you a solid soldered board like we have here. Moving on to the assembly! We get to go back to our lovely case. Just look at those clean lines. Alrighty, now we can take the screws out from the board, and before gently placing our soldered PCB and plate, the guts of the board if you will, put a little case foam just to dampen any extra noise that could potentially occur as you're typing. And from there, it's as simple as screwing everything in. It's not as easy as it looks, so don't get discouraged if it takes you some time. And then boom, on go our timeless keycaps that beautifully complement the color of the case. Now with everything fully assembled and modded here, our keyboard comes in at a hefty 3 pounds, 4.3 ounces. And now for the sound test. Ultimately, what we end up with is this rich, velvety sounding board, and that sound goes really well with the color scheme of it all. Luxurious from the PCB to the way it looks and to the way it sounds. My experience building this original Tofu65 was, in a nutshell, very fun and very rewarding, and I hope this video inspires you to go build a keyboard of your own. Thanks for watching, and remember to follow us on Instagram at customkeys_. That's custom with a K.